Hi everybody, my name is Rachel and I'm going to talk to you today about Lexington and Concord. I chose Lexington and Concord because I always thought it was interesting when I was teaching American history, and it ties into what we were discussing with the divine providence, and also it's about 45 minutes down the road from Boston and the Freedom Walking Trail. Lexington and Concord has always been nicknamed the shot heard round the world. And you think of it as a battle, but in my research, what I found out was it was the shot heard round the world, but not so much because of the battle and its significance, but more about the fact that countries were finding out that farmers and just your average guys working in the colonies were willing to fight Great Britain to show them that they weren't going to put up with the way they were treating them any longer. A couple of things that I found out while I was doing my research was that, we all know the story. The British go to Concord to find the ammunition that's stored there. They didn't find the ammunition. They came up against the farmers and the militia at Lexington, and 8 people were killed. And then they turned back around and crossed the Old North Bridge, and as they were crossing the bridge, the Americans used their, what we know as guerrilla warfare, to attack the British soldiers, and that's where the British soldiers had their biggest casualties. It's really not considered a win for the Americans, but it did kind of turn the tide. The biggest thing that I found out was that it set up the rest of the world to realize that Americans were not going to stand back and take what the British were dishing out. One of the things that I found out was most interesting was I never realized John Hancock's father was a minister, and he was a minister in Lexington. And during the Great Awakening, Concord and Lexington were 2 different towns. Lexington was more rural. Concord was more of an urban town, kind of like a trade center, because 2 rivers diverged into Concord. Through the Great Awakening, Concord went more with the New Light philosophy, and Reverend John Hancock went more with the Old Lights, and he was replaced later on with a man named Jonas Clark, and all this was in the article "The Revolutionary Worlds of Lexington and Concord Compared" by Mary Fuhrer, Fuhrer, and Reverend Clark was the one that actually got the militia together. One of the quotes from her book or her article was that Reverend Clark said, the townsmen's rights were bestowed by God, derived from nature, and confirmed by the Constitution. And this ties back to what we've been talking about with God's providence, and how during the American Revolution a lot of things did seem like God had his hand in them. The other thing that I found out was really interesting was on April 19th, the day that Lexington and Concord happened, John Hancock and Samuel Adams asked Reverend Clark if his men were ready, and Clark responded with, he had trained them for this very hour, and if they need be, they would die under the shadow of the house of God. So even though he had trained his men, he also had he was praying for them, and he felt like that God would protect them. Again, this is a very interesting time period of history, and following this are just a few little pictures of Lexington and Concord. I hope you enjoy it, and one day I would like to do the Freedom Trail and see what it's all about, and I hope I get to visit it. Thank you. Have a good evening, and I'll talk to you again soon.